Assalamualaikum and very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Circular Economy Linking Business to Sustainability, the Why and How webinar, organized by the Sustainability Unit of Malaysia Productivity Corporation, supported by University Kebangsaan Malaysia and also Machinery and Equipment Productivity Nexus. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hasbul Hassan, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar, which will run for 1 hour from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Before we start, let me give a brief in terms of the Sustainability Unit. This unit was established on the 2nd of January 2020 and is a new unit under Productivity Corporation Development, or PCD, division of MPC. And it has got a few functions, which I'll just read out briefly. The first one is to carry out secondary research for Malaysia's circular economy landscape towards increasing productivity at the industry level, to provide an understanding and exposure to the public on the importance of the circular economy, with emphasis on sustainable usage of resources, to promote the concept of a CE through strategic cooperation with the public, private, academia, and industry associations, to establish a sustainable circular economy ecosystem to increase productivity within industries, to carry out benchmarking exercises and knowledge sharing programs on CE locally and internationally. Those are the functions of the Sustainability Unit. During this session, you are invited to ask questions either verbally or through the chat box provided, and we will try to entertain them as best as we can. For today's session, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Farizal Muhammad Razali to make a presentation on the topic. Before we start, let me introduce to you our speaker for this webinar. Dr. Farizal Razali holds a PhD in Political Science from the Institute of Political Studies, Paris, where he specialized in energy politics and foreign policy. Research has been spent on his DNA, where he spent most of his professional career during the last 17 years in corporate and academic research. Among those institutions he has affiliated with are the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute, ASLI, Khazanah National Berhad, Khazanah, Glasgow, Buenos Aires, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Singapore, and CERI, Paris. Dr. Farizal has held consulting role with the World Bank Group on Islamic finance and PPP in energy-related projects, Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology, MITE, TNB, the Prime Minister's Department, and AB Arthur Luxury Lifestyle and Tourism, Paris. Leveraging his expertise on quantitative strategic research, he helped clients to incorporate geopolitical and economic data into their international business strategy. Dr. Farizal speaks fluent French, German, Spanish, and Bahasa Indonesia. This multilingual individual was one of his greatest, this multilingual talent was one of his greatest assets during his celebrity stint at RTM hosting the morning talk show Hello on 2. A father of two sons, Farizal currently teaches at the Center for Politics and International Affairs, National University of Malaysia. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Farizal to start his presentation. Silakan, Doctor.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction from Tuan Haji Hasbullah. And I'd like to take this opportunity also to thank the MPC for having me on this more of a sharing session with the title Business to Sustainability, the Why and How. Maybe we can move to the next slide. So our agenda today will be this. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to paint a rather big picture on how fatigued our Mother Earth is. And that is where we're going to identify the stakeholders. How has this environmental issues, especially climate change, has got to do with businesses? And when I said businesses here, it refers specifically in this presentation to SMEs, and the reason I'm going to tell you later. And we're going to then justify the context of this thought, which is the sustainability-driven business. What does it entail? How does it look like? And then I'm going to develop a plan of actions, ingredients that perhaps SMEs can start thinking to employ in their business model, and to make sure that they commit to the sustainability costs. And we'll do the conclusion thereafter. So let's move on to the next slide. Well, in 2019, which was last year, the average temperature, the Earth temperature, the globe temperature, across global and ocean surface was 0.95 degrees Celsius above the 20th century average of 13.9 degrees Celsius, making it the second warmest year on record. Now, the global annual temperature has increased at an average rate of 0.07 degrees Celsius per decade since 1880, and over twice that rate to 0.18 degrees Celsius since 1981. The 5 warmest years in between 1880 to 2019 record have all occurred since 2015, while 9 of the 10 warmest years have occurred since 2005. Now, you may be wondering, why am I presenting you with this global temperature? Now, what's so big deal about an increase by 0.1, 0.2? It is significant. Just to put and give you the context that between 1981 and also the last ice age, our globe temperature has increased by 4 degrees Celsius. And that is how it is. This seriousness of the issue with respect to the temperature change globally. The next slide. A few degrees of warming, for the globe is incredibly significant. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has strongly recommended limiting the global temperature increase to only 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid the impacts of climate change steeply escalating. But then even at these 1.5 degrees of global warming, times will be tough for us. The impacts amplify rapidly between just 1.5 and 2 degrees of temperature increase. Now, those of you familiar with the climate change materials, you will definitely be aware of this 1.5 degree scenario and 2 degree scenario. Now, to avoid the impacts we will experience at 2 degree scenarios warming, as presented on the slide now, we have no other choice but to limit our warming to 1.5 degree maximum between now until at least 2030 and extend to 2050. If nothing changes, we are on track for a rise in temperature, like I mentioned, of between 4 to 6%. The difference in temperatures between now and the last ice age was 4 degrees Celsius. So if we dare enough to go to that 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, we would be definitely experiencing these disastrous effects of the climate change. And that could probably be the next one after this coronavirus pandemic. Now, some of you might be wondering, are there any correlations between this the current pandemic that we are currently, experiencing with this whole climate change thingy? Now, we do not have direct evidence that climate change is influencing the spread of COVID-19. But what we do know is that climate change does alter how we relate to other species on Earth. That matters to our health and our risk for infections. Now, as the planet heats up, and the reason why I presented you with that global temperature is that animals big and small on land and in the sea are headed to poles to get out of the heat. Now that means these animals are coming into contact with other animals that they normally would not. And that creates an opportunity for pathogens to get into new hosts. and the host will be humans. And many of the root causes of climate change also increase the risk of pandemics. Deforestation, which occurs mostly for agricultural purposes, is the largest cause of habitat loss worldwide. Loss of habitat forces these animals and people, and these organisms will share germs with each other. Less demand for animal meat and more sustainable animal husbandry could decrease emerging infectious disease risks to lower the greenhouse gas emissions. So there are some correlations, just an issue of magnitude, that we need to address this climate change. Actions need to be taken because we might be facing more serious pandemic crisis and worse still, climate crisis. We move on to the next slide. The next slide on, all right, thanks. Now then comes to the question of what has that got to do with me as businesses, as enterprises? Why it matters for business to adopt sustainability? Now, maybe some of you already or have already been convinced by how the climate change has affected their business and enterprises. To those who haven't, now you have to convince yourself that you will be affected sooner or later in many different ways. And this is especially true to the SMEs, the small, medium enterprises. Why is that? Because as you can see on the slide, you represent the huge chunk of the economy. The economy maybe fail without your contribution. Imagine the latest stats that we had from our Department of Statistics shows that SMEs contribute 5.8% to Malaysia's GDP. And 38.9% was actually contributed based on the 2015 prices. And so this is huge. If anyhow SMEs fail with their businesses, that would mean a disaster to the country's economy. Because 98.5% of business establishments, according to the data by the SMEs, in Malaysia, 98.5% are SMEs. They cut across all sizes and sectors, which we will look at later on. And this number is no surprising because it echoes also the number, for instance, SMEs in Europe. 99% of businesses are indeed SMEs. And in numbers, there are some 907,065 establishments of SMEs are in Malaysia. And can we move to the next slide? And this is how SMEs contribution by sectors. If you look at the slide, you can see still agriculture represents the biggest contribution, followed by services. And can you imagine the kind of disastrous effects it will have on the economy should these services and agriculture, manufacturing, even construction were to be wiped out of this economic contribution because of their failing their business, not just because of some economic repercussions, economic crisis, but more importantly because of, say, pandemic and also climate crisis. And imagine that in terms of the employment context, agriculture provides some 41.4% contribution to the total employment in Malaysia, and services contributed some 50.5%. And this is huge. Imagine again the failure among SMEs to survive, to exist, just because of climate crisis, just because of pandemic. That will be disastrous to the country's economy. And so the point that I'm making is that SMEs are critical agents for change in mentality and also attitude. And these MSCs can indeed make a real difference. Next slide, please. Now, let me now bring you to what do we mean by sustainability driven business? Some of you might be familiar with the term TBL, or the three bottom line, where you have the profit, and then you have the society, and then you have the environment. Well, what I did change, however, is in terms of society, where normally in TBL, the term used is people. But the way I see it is that we need to get to the larger aggregate of people. So when we talk about Malaysia, we're talking about Malaysian society as a whole. But the more important thing today is that today's business model requires a great shift. Milton Friedman, those of you familiar with his work, 50 years ago presented the thesis that says that the only business of a business is to make profit. Well, I would argue, yes, it is true still that profit matters, and that's the reason why profit has to appear. Profit is important and indispensable for businesses and enterprises to survive. Without it, you would cease to exist. But it's not the only thing that matters. Gone are the days where profit is the ultimate goal of business. What businesses, enterprises need to think now, need to challenge themselves now, is how to give a purpose to the business. And if anything, that purpose has to be sustainability. Profits now will have to be reinvested in not only your shareholders or investors, but stakeholders, which the society segments as a whole, the civil society's customers, and not to mention and not to be forgotten, the environment. Whether you are big or you're small, especially post-pandemic era, you need to be convinced that your enterprise and business has to continuously engage with and learn from various stakeholders. So this is where I bring in this so-called model, the integrity. That integrity here defined in terms of being honest and true to your belief. Because when you have a purpose, you have a belief that underpins that purpose. And you have to be transparent in your business decision, open to feedback, and strive for efficiency through innovation. This is really, really key for all businesses, enterprises to do. Obviously, we can debate on this, but in the end, what matters is that profit, too much profit, is definitely going to kill you in the long run in today's world. Competitors are abound to come in and compete. The thing about profit is that the higher the profit is, the more attraction for new competitors to come in, because we know that something is just selling above market price. And so when competitors come in, all businesses know that your market share will shrink and you have to do more to increase or even to sustain that market share. But the thing is, compared to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's not about making more profit, but you have to have different strategies to convince people to come and deliver profits to your businesses. So that's what it is in today's new world. Can we move to the next slide? So now let's deal with the real world aspect of committing to the sustainable cause. You need an action plan. But what should be in that action plan? Now, this is something food for thought that we can discuss further later. I'm presenting you now what I have here, the two things, the two key ingredients that you have to have in your business and enterprise. One is the marketing orientation, or sort of the market orientation. And the second one is the entrepreneurial orientation. And how you do this, how you execute this strategy is by leveraging your values, which of course, in the context of business, we refer that to the management values. And what are these management values? In the context of sustainability, they refer to the sub-values or sub-team values which are sustainability practices and sustainability engagement. So your belief to protect the environment is because you believe you commit yourself to sustainability costs. And you do that through your level best by means of sustainable practices in your business. So let's take a look at these items in detail. What do we mean by market orientation? It simply means customer focus. That's it, period. Businesses need to focus on competitors and put new ideas into action because the demand, the way the demand has shifted, need to be understood. This is where data comes in. This is where businesses, enterprises need to embrace technology to capture all these unstructured data laying around us. Gone are the days, 70s and 80s, that you need to do surveys, conventional, boring surveys, dull surveys. Now you need to include machine learning, AI technology. It sounds so big, but if you really Google up, it's not as big as or difficult as you might imagine. Assistance everywhere. Exchanges on the web, blogs, and so on are everywhere for you to access information, partners and collaborators. Now, other than just focusing on customers, sometimes customers may not give you the entire thing, the entire landscape. They may not even know what they want sometimes. There are still segments of consumers and in some industries. And so this is where you as entrepreneurs have to have what we call the entrepreneurial orientation. And this refers to three things at least. One is the innovativeness, which I think many entrepreneurs are aware of this, proactiveness, and risk-taking. Now, everyone knows in business world, if you're not a risk-taker, you know that your business is not going to grow, and that still hold water.
Sorry, Doc. If I were to, just probably give ourselves a few seconds in terms of trying to digest all the presentation and ask some question, Doc. I have a question for you. In terms of if you were to look at a SMEs, and if you have been involved with SME businesses, and if we were to actually sit down and discuss with them in terms of how they develop their business strategies. Now, what would be the 2 or 3 items which you think SME will prioritize? Because I understand we are talking about sustainability here, but in the minds of the SMEs, sustainability can be a few things. Apart from the circular economy, definitely they are talking about their ability to survive short term, as well as the ability to contribute to the society long term. But what do you think will be, or maybe you have some experiences in terms of probably facilitating a session where SMEs they are talking about their business strategies. What do you think will be their priorities?
3 things. I have this little short experience. While I was in France, I was helping to consult this particular SMEs in France who are supplying materials for some luxury brands in Paris, and they are from different provinces in France. So they have like providing yarn, for instance, and materials like garment materials. So mostly in the textile industry. And what happened is that the 4 seasons are not like it used to be. The weather changes very fast. And so when they're growing the crops, and also, when they're getting, even from their suppliers to send, there'll be like changing in terms of, time delivery and the efficiency of delivery, for instance, to these luxury brands, for instance, and some of them lost business. And so what my team and I did was that we're trying to identify how they can engage their suppliers. So one thing is definitely your supplier. SMEs really need to engage with suppliers because your suppliers would be the lifeline of your business. Without them, you will be out of business in no time. And by communicating to suppliers, understanding problems that they are facing, what these particular provinces entrepreneurs have done is to have in their association some funds, how they can mobilize these funds to help these suppliers, these growers, for instance, like their farmers, for instance, in ensuring some, injection of technology to address the so-called weather crisis. And so this is small funds, as simple as putting out the fertilizers out of the picture of the equation and replacing it with some untested product by some local universities. And so it's cheap. This is where the risk-taking comes in as an entrepreneur, for instance. And of course, it worked to some farmers. It didn't work to some others. But then, technologies keep on evolving. And so the point here that I'm making is that, to cut it short, it's just that, by communicating and engaging the suppliers, it helps to find a common solution. It is small, but yet innovative for that particular provinces because it has never been done.
So you're saying that it is very important for the SMEs to engage with their suppliers and to make sure that they have got the same management philosophy, isn't it? If let's say exactly. if you're thinking about sustainability, if you're thinking about a circular economy, and if you are not engaged with a supplier who has got the same thinking, then it's going to be very difficult for you as a business because you are not going to be able to get supplies that you want. So one of the key things that I think the SMEs need to really ponder and trying to strategize is to make sure that whoever is going to be their partner in terms of suppliers will have to have the same management philosophy like themselves, right?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. And that is where we put it under the management values. What happened in this case is that the simple weather crisis to us consumers is a weather crisis, but to enterprises is more than just a weather crisis because it affects their bottom line, the profit, for instance, in this case. And this has somehow brought them together. They may not have the same so-called business philosophy, but because of the common problem that they are facing, brought them together to find a common solution. And that eventually, but then, when we first talked to these enterprises, to these SMEs, no mention of sustainability at all. As you said, they were all talking about profits. We could not deliver the orders, and but so no mention of sustainability at all. So I think among consultants, for instance, when we deal with sustainability, you don't necessarily have to artificially utter the word sustainability because it sometimes can put people off. But what is more important is in terms of what I call the sustainability practices. And so these farmers, for instance, exclude, sorry, I just want to finish. These farmers, for instance, exclude traditional suppliers who do not conform to a good or best practices in agriculture. Then they found that they have some suppliers who have not been doing what they should be doing, even by law, the French law, for instance, or the Environmental Act, for instance. And so then only they realized that all this while they have been procuring supplies from these suppliers. And so what they do is what we then intervene is that my team and I, especially one of my colleagues who specialize in this strategic SMEs interaction, what he proposed is to have these social norms to compare the suppliers, and the province so-called the province administration will list them, rank them according to how they comply to all the existing acts, for instance. And it's a kind of a shaming, strategy, but it did work. 4 years, within these 4 years, the management department of this local university did study and how that has changed the behavior among suppliers in terms of complying to the environmental law or principles, shown some positive attitude by 70 to 80% changed in the use of, some fertilizers, in how they manage the delivery of the supplies to these enterprises and SMEs.
Okay, Doc. That's this. Thank you very much for your explanation and also your sharing of your experience, Doc. That's the one opinion from one of our participants, Cik Nazmi. He said that probably we might want to understand how it can be implemented. Okay, that's one opinion that or a question to you. The second one is from Fauzia Hanum. she said that probably because you have explained that the weather change, the temperature change, the global rise in temperature and all that might also cause a lot of possibilities, might cause a lot of problems, like, for example, the pandemic. Maybe this is a good opportunity for us to share with the society that this is a real example of how, if one do not think about the environment, it can also impact the whole world in a very disastrous way. So maybe there's not much, I don't know, maybe there are studies, but it have not been shared with the society that probably this pandemic is caused by the things that you have just mentioned, you know.
Yeah, let me tackle that first so-called, well, not sorry, the question. I think that is a challenge, I have to admit, that, you know, executing a sustainability business plan is really a challenge. Because as of now, even especially in Malaysia, we do not really have this, you know, like kind of like a case study, systematic case studies, especially among SMEs. There are patches of work, you know, being done, for instance. But I think this is also where SMEs need to do. As I said, sustainability-driven businesses is full of narratives and stories and experiences. It's not a conventional business like we used to, you know, to see in the past. Different companies would have different way of approaching sustainability. You know, at least in their sectors. And so we need more stories to come from SMEs. Now with the website, it doesn't cost them much to document these stories and experiences.
And God, for all you know, they have been involved in this sustainability movement, but they did not actually communicate that as a sustainability effort, you know. And probably there it has to be a body or a study to be done to identify the businesses that have been supporting the sustainability philosophy and promote these companies, you know.
Exactly, because one thing I noticed from my humble experience, you know, not that long. I mean, I've been for about like 7 years now, you know, on and off in this sustainability thing, and but also my involvement is very much in the financing aspect, the financing mechanism, for instance. Now, what we learn is that people are not, you know, forthcoming in sharing their experiences, and this need to be enhanced. If, you know, the government is taking time to do it, or some agencies are taking time to do it, now individual SMEs, enterprises need to come forward and tell these stories and share these stories. They can do this in various different ways. And this is how we can know how we can actually execute and plan. Because the same players in that same industry, for instance, sometimes aware, because there's a lot of creativity in how people approach this sustainability. That's a good thing to me. Some people argue that it's not a good thing because they feel like greenwashing, so to speak. Like, you know, you will consider everything under the sky is green, when in fact it's not. But I think at this initial stage is okay, especially for Malaysia. Is okay. You fake it, it's okay, but until you get it right, because you need to internalize it. As I said, integrity is key. That's why I put integrity. Because integrity is something that you cannot see, you cannot measure, but you know if you stay true to your belief, and also you know if you stay true to your philosophy, that you want and you are trying your very best. For instance, one case, let's just quickly share, a toy, I don't know whether you have heard of green toys. It started in 2007. This is an American toy company. And in 2007, it was SMEs, and now it has like operations in almost like 75 countries selling its products. Now, what it did was it started off just by this Lori Hyman, the one of the owners, and she was looking for, you know, the non-toxic toys for her toddlers at that time. And at that time, imagine 2007, who would imagine in the US, they didn't have that? But yeah, it happened. I mean, or at least maybe not in all states, for instance. And so because of that, she partnered with another team, collaborator, who has this sustainability value, strong sustainability commitment. And what they did was that they started off this green toy adventure, but they didn't want to repeat the current existing business model, where many US companies, what they did is that they will be sending raw materials which they procure from different parts of the world to China, and China, because of the manufacturing advantage that they have, and then ship it back to the US. So the thing that they wanted to do is to reduce shipping, because shipping leads to carbon emission, and so carbon footprint. So that is the problem with many businesses in the US. So what they did and tell themselves, hey, yes, we took the risk to now change. Instead of shipping it to China, we ship it to the US straight instead. So we cut half the journey of that raw materials going to China and then coming back to the US. And at the same time, because of considering not just profit, but people, we're giving new employments to the Americans, for instance. And this was even before Trump was elected, thinking about American interests, for instance. And so they provide employment because now they have the manufacturing in the US. Of course, you would argue that, you can never beat the cost, the cheaper cost, in China, but you're taking the risk. Obviously, you have to make the change. And so once they have it there, they start looking for manufacturers. That's the first problem. Where do I look for manufacturers for these toys? Who can manufacture this and execute? Okay, the question of executing.
Who are going to be their manufacturing partners? Yeah,
exactly. Who are going to do that? And they were basically, like spending time. And as I said, this is challenging. You have to sit down, spending time, like months and months, looking through. And bear in mind, 2007, internet wasn't as vibrant as today. And so they need to use the internet as well as looking at the yellow pages and talking to people just to find manufacturers who, as Tuan Haji said, sharing that same value. Of course, you won't find many. And even if you find any, they'll be like, you don't know how to trust these people. They can just screw up with your project because you have a business. They are basically just to manufacture what they do. So eventually they have a pool of people who will manufacture parts of the toys. Because what they're doing, what they are planning in mind is that to have the toys from the, they call it like a recycled milk jug. And from here they're going to design the toy without any materials that are non-green, meaning that they cannot even have like anything like nails, or they cannot even have non-certified green materials. Exactly, everything should be like environmental friendly and truly environmental friendly. That's another challenge in terms of design. So they need to find young graduates, for instance, from architecture school, those who can design things and so on. And that is how they keep the cost low as well, because they're using all amateurs. And I think in Malaysia, one thing that could be equivalent to this is in our fashion industry. We now have more fashion designers who just graduated from school.
Yeah, well, what is interesting in that? What is interesting in terms of what you have just shared with us is in terms of the leadership role.
Yeah,
the leadership role has to be taken by the SME, by the company who wanted to actually have this sustainability movement in their business activities. And only by having this leadership role, then all the stakeholders that is important to your business can be roped in and can be influenced to have the same mentality like you have for your own particular business, right? So you have just shared with us the green toy showed an excellent leadership capability to influence their stakeholders in order for them to be able to share their business objectives.
Yeah, true. And one thing also from this story of Green Toy is that the founders mentioned this, which I found it very, very interesting. You don't have to start big and huge like what they did. You can just look at your packaging, how you package your products currently. Try to find ways how you can do better with the packaging. If you are now currently using like more, it causes more wastage from that particular way of packaging your products, for instance, try to reduce that. Look around for any technologies, for instance, that you can invest, and also people that can advise you on, how you can improve from your packaging, and then share with your customers. Write it down on your packaging, and you can see the difference. And I think Malaysians are not any, less reactive to new ideas. Sometimes we underestimate our people. I've met quite a number of, they're being pessimistic. Like they say, look, doc, I mean, this is not real. Our people, do not know this. Okay, that's where your entrepreneurial orientation comes in. Now, obviously, if you don't have that belief, there's nothing much we can do about it. So you have to.
What is also important, Doc, is the quality of the product that you produced. I have got some experiences. For example, if you are using the straw made from paper, the paper straw, yeah, and they put it on your Nescafe Tarik, hot Nescafe Tarik, and you can only use it.
It doesn't taste the same anymore.
not only that, it doesn't taste the same anymore, but it will just you can't use it after 2 or 3 sips. I mean, in order for us to be able to convince the society, that the product that we are actually producing, and it is actually using the sustainability approach, will have to be a product of quality. Then only you can convince the society and the buyers.
Yes, that is so true. In fact, the reason why this so-called green movement failed when it comes to in the business context, especially in the 80s and 90s, just exactly what you said. It's with respect to product. People thought that, you can just compromise on the quality and then sell it and people will buy it. But that is not how it is and how it should be.
And
green
if the quality
does not
of your
mean
product
anything
is
less.
better than, if the quality of your product is better than the product that you have produced before, then I guess you can easily convince your buyers, right?
Yes. And I think this is where SMEs also play a very, very important role to sort of like trigger, for instance, a more dynamic and vibrant university research and challenge researchers in these local universities, for instance, to come up with more quality research in terms of, that will end up as products, for instance. And if you don't want to, for instance, I mean, I shouldn't be saying this, but if you don't want to use local universities, you have the choice to go to, say, other parts of the region, for instance, because now with advance in technology, you can collaborate and should collaborate with people regardless where they are. The most important thing is that, like you said, I totally agree that you have to find people who share the same commitment, to share the same belief, for instance, to make a difference. And because of technology as well, cost in producing this green or so-called environmental friendly products has gone down dramatically. In fact, now if you look at even the World Bank report, for instance, on green and the sustainability financing, it is erroneous. When you thought that it's more expensive to produce, for instance, some green products than some non-so-called green products. Of course, it doesn't happen across the industries yet, but evidences on the ground have somehow shown that the cost is not necessarily a barrier anymore. But then again, we need to improve and enhance our R&D, for instance. For instance, a simple problem like the straw. And that has been, plaguing us for quite some time already now in Malaysia, especially after the movement of this, non-plastic movement, for instance. And this is an opportunity through the entrepreneurial orientation, for instance, among enterprises to look into the problem and how you can, just simply tweak here and there and how you can improve on the product. And this is no, what I call it, it's not impossible to be done. But someone will have to take the first step. And this is exploring and identifying opportunities. So problems, for instance, from the pandemic, for instance, that should create opportunities. Normal people see it as a problem and, complaining about it and how I'm going to survive and things like that. But enterprises cannot do that. Enterprises have to be creative, innovative, and look at all the problems and turn them into business opportunities. In fact, that's why you venture into entrepreneurs. Otherwise, you would have become, dull people like me, researcher, for instance, or even worse, I don't know, working for somebody else rather than working for yourself.
I guess the worst thing that could happen to a product which has got no quality is that it is not only the business will not be able to sell more products, but the perception of the society about this so-called thing about environment, taking care of the environment, will be very negative. They are very pessimistic.
Yeah.
Because I mean, why should we use a product that is more inferior than the product that we used before? If enterprises can convince a society with us making sure that we are taking care of the environment and we are going to produce better products, I think the society will be convinced and they will be asking for more of these kind of products. And because of this, then the enterprise can sell more products, can venture into other form of businesses that has got the environment approach in their strategies.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, but as I said again, both consumers and enterprises have role to play, and consumers may even challenge and demand enterprises to come up with quality products. And should they not do that, then they should be asked why. And consumers can also, the powers consumers is that consumers can also, for instance, like community funding, for instance, and these happen in Germany. In their beer production states, in the upper the northern part of Germany, where because of lack of funding coming from banks, because banks they need to be funding bankable projects, for instance, how they can make beer production more environmental friendly without using like too much water, for instance, and then also resources, and so what the community did was, it's a crowdfunding mechanism. So it's a kind of similar idea to cooperatives, for instance. But this particular cooperative has very specific purpose for this green so-called investment, community funding. And part of this community are also part of this, these enterprises, who form that same community. And so they see that, okay, if the government couldn't be convinced by it, or the local government couldn't be convinced by it, not because they don't buy the idea, but because they need other competing priorities as well, and they don't have enough money to be channeled to that, for instance. Now the community plays a role. In this case, my point is to show that even consumers can play this role to help enterprises and companies offer them better solution through better products, quality. And so this is a kind of like a simple example how this happens. And I mean, mostly in developed countries, it's much easier. In developing and also underdeveloped countries, things are much more challenging. But again, sometimes, as I said, and sometimes I too sometimes underestimate what my country can do sometimes when you compare to international, without knowing that we have, for instance, in some remote districts in Malaysia, for instance, who are, as we speak, currently trying to do something which protect the environment in their own way and significant way. So what we do now, I mean, to me, myself, and I remind myself, a researcher, is that more field studies need to be done. We need to reach out to the communities, and talk to them. And for all and this is what I said earlier in my presentation, engaging the stakeholders. Enterprises need to go and engage the stakeholders to get new opportunities, new ideas, or problems that they can solve. And this is where they solve the social community problems. And from here they can think of simple products, maybe products for that particular community. Again, of course, profit, it's not going to be big, but you are starting somewhere, and that can be implemented elsewhere, who might be in need of that same solution, same product. So that's how innovation goes, comes a long way. It doesn't come overnight, because with the limited funding, you definitely cannot be so ambitious with your plan. And especially in like uncertain times like this, you need to also calculate your risk. All right. And so you need to have, this is where collaboration cannot be, excluded in this whole thing. You need to collaborate, okay, and we need to emphasize on collaboration and the quality of partners. That is another very, very important issues. So not just somebody you trust with, but somebody you know can deliver. And I think businesses, enterprises know this very well. You know, you don't necessarily work with somebody that you just, you know, simply good friends and buddies with, but you work with someone who can deliver. And I think SMEs need to, you know, those SMEs who may not have embraced that, you need to do that, because if you are imagining your businesses to grow, enterprises to grow one day and be listed, for instance, trust me, this ESG, they call it, which is environment, social, and governance, is the key pillars that any potential investors will look into your companies in years to come. Even it is happening now in Malaysia.
ESG in Malaysia?
ESG, the environment, social, and governance principles.
Mm-hmm. And how effective that has been in Malaysia?
No, it is actually a principles where businesses are benchmarked against, you know, their contribution to the environment, to how they deal with the social problems of the community. So it's not just as simple as corporate social responsibility, but it relates to their business, for instance, and also in terms of governance, the structure within the companies itself, like how you treat your talents. Don't forget, when we talk about sustainability, don't forget the element of human being. Your employees, no matter how small they are in numbers, you may have a high 4 or 5 employees. Look at what happened during the pandemic, for instance. Many SMEs couldn't survive, even in the second month, and this could be linked to many different reasons. But one of them is that, of course, it could be the planning, for instance. We don't have like a real intention to grow our people, for instance,
And do you see regulators and authorities have they are actually one of the most important stakeholder in the whole ecosystem now?
Obviously, if you talk about ecosystem, you cannot deny their important role, and they have to play a role. But it's just that as you can see, in our current political climate, sometimes you cannot depend on just these regulators and also the governments. And so as I said, the values for each like entrepreneurs need to come in strong as well. So whenever you hire people, for instance, in sustainability kind of a scheme or formula is to always bring in your people and see your people as just part of the important component in making your business sustainable. Without these people and talent, your business will not go far. And so that needs to be, into every SME's planning. So that, yes, maybe at times tough decisions need to be made, that we need to lay off workers, for instance. But when you planned, we need to include all this, the bust and the boom. And so you need to include, okay, what is the worst case scenario if I were to lay off workers? How would I ensure to at least sustain for another couple of months, for instance? So you have to somehow put their interest as just your interest. If they lose a job, for instance, what will happen to them? So like putting yourself in their shoes. That's the whole point here. So it is just not a professional kind of relationship between employer and employee. I don't care, like for as long as I make profit, you're here. If I don't make profit, you are not here. So this is not going to be sustainable. So the planning has to always incorporate human as part of it, and the great contributor in this whole sustainability framework.
Which country do you see as one of the most successful country in implementing this?
Obviously, in terms of processes, like when it comes to like innovative ideas, producing products, I would rate Scandinavian countries as number one, or number one region. mean, look at IKEA, for instance, and the problem with that is the national DNA is in itself sustainability. So so if you have many of you, I think, have traveled to this part of the world, for instance, so you can see, space is not as luxurious as we would expect in, say, other parts of Europe, even in France or in Germany, for instance, But so their life is very minimal. So-called, they have this minimalist culture in their philosophy, the national philosophy. So there's no such thing as like, wastage, extravagant kind of like lifestyle and things like that.
So you are going into the attitude part of the human being, and of course it can be related to culture and all the things that is actually long term in nature, and for us to be successful in Malaysia, I mean, we all know the culture that we have, and if you were to compare that with say the Scandinavian countries, it is so far apart. And if they are going for they are minimalist. We are maximalists, and we have abundance of resources all these years. Throughout history, we have abundance of resources, and we know that we can just put a plant into the soil, and the plant will grow, for example, and to change this whole culture and attitude, I guess it's going to be a huge struggle, isn't it?
Yes, but the irony is, why do we, or many Malaysians, love IKEA products? So I think that's a good step, and I think why, for instance, maybe a thorough study need to be done now in terms of Malaysia's preference and choice of products, for instance, and let's map that to where it comes from, the origin of that products. If it originates from, say, Scandinavian region, for instance, then the question is why? Are you more convinced with their products, and that philosophy that underpins the products? So it's not to say that, yes, it's hard. I know it's hard. Yeah, I agree, totally agree with you. I mean, I've been in this country for like the longest time as well. I'm having all my schools here, and my university days here. And but again, the shift is there. The shift is there. And it's just that now we need more, not just cues, but I think we need more, what do you call it, nudges, in terms of, from the policy side. And I would definitely put SMEs as well, businesses, to be the change agent, as I said, to drive this further, for instance. So other than the Scandinavian, of course, in our region, near to us, maybe slightly, like similar in culture, if at all, will be, of course, the long referred to example, Japan, for instance. But Japan as well is also in the DNA, is also in the national culture.
Yeah, exactly.
The cleanliness. But surprisingly, China is another great emerging example, for instance. If you go and visit, cities in China, for instance, one thing is that technology is like huge in China. And what this technology advancement has done is that it has somehow helped and driven sustainability in China, for instance. Yes, they consume a lot, but at the same time, they're being reminded, by the policymakers that this is not forever. And look, when they have like a trade war, for instance, with now today we know, whether the trade war is going to continue or not, with the election now as we speak, delivering its results. And Chinese consumers are at stake. And so what you need to do, so you need to survive under this whole constraint, for instance, and that somehow changed the behavior. I think for Malaysia is that one thing is, like we are relatively, countries with, we're exposed to international trade, definitely, but we are somehow not directly affected as, the case of China, for instance, or other economies, for instance. But that should not make us to, rest on our laurels, because we need to think about, especially the current generation, need to think about what will happen, in the next, years to come. This pandemic, I think, should be the first nudge, serious nudge, meaning that serious reminder maybe, not to my generation per se, but maybe, to, those who are in their 20s now, for instance. You need to be reminded that just a small, not too small, like just virus, I mean, can kill everything, can prolong this suffering, so to speak. And so just imagine.
The reason why I came up with that is that because the businesses, they are in for profit. That is the reason why they came up with their business initiative. And if the society is not ready for this sort of movement, then it's difficult for them to sell their products or services. Then they will go back to the old way of doing things, and in terms of priority, it might not be their priority anymore. And that's the reason why I think when we talk about this, to me, the most important stakeholder in this movement should be the government. They should be the ones who will have to be punitive if it comes to people not following the regulations that has been provided for when it comes to environment. They should actually push for it, and they should actually penalize or be very, very punitive. And there has to be what we say, walk the talk. There has to be actions that people can see being undertaken. There has to be promotions that is being dealt with seriously. And we understand your presentation has been very, very exciting, Dr. Farizal, and we thank you very much for the time that you have taken for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. There are so many things that we can discuss, and definitely we can get a lot of your insights in terms of how we can promote a circular economy in Malaysia. And we thank you very much for your time. And inshallah, umur panjang, kita jumpa lagi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ranaji.
Boleh kita promote last slide, Darul, for all the attendees? Okay. Okay, kalau itu tak apa, kita ucapkan very thank you to Dr. Farizal dan Tuan Haji Hasbullah for today's webinar. So also thanks to all the attendees that attend and support our webinars. So see you on next webinar. Thank you very much.